Before we begin this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our best emotional stories. Your support means everything to us. Now, let's dive into this remarkable tale. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the cobblestone streets of London as preparations began for what was supposed to be a routine royal engagement. Princess Kate was scheduled to attend the annual charity event at Westminster Abbey, an occasion she had marked on her calendar months in advance. The event held special meaning for her, as it supported children's hospitals across the United Kingdom, a cause close to her heart. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere buzzed with careful organization. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring every detail was perfect. Kate stood before a tall mirror in her dressing room, her stylist making final adjustments to her elegant blue dress. The fabric flowed gracefully, appropriate for the formal occasion, yet comfortable enough for the day's activities. "You look absolutely stunning." "Your Royal Highness," her stylist said with genuine admiration. Kate smiled warmly. "Thank you, Sarah. I just hope the weather holds up." The forecast mentioned possible wind. Through the window, she could see the ornate horse-drawn carriage waiting in the courtyard below. It was a beautiful antique vehicle, restored to its original glory. With deep burgundy paint and gold trim that gleamed in the sunlight, two magnificent white horses stood patiently in their harnesses, their coats brushed to perfection. The decision to use the traditional carriage instead of a modern vehicle had been made weeks earlier. The charity organizers thought it would add a touch of royal pageantry to the event, something that would delight the crowds and draw more attention to their cause. Kate had agreed without hesitation. Knowing how much the public enjoyed these traditional displays, Officer James Mitchell stood at attention near the carriage, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. At 32 years old, James had served in the Royal Protection Command for 8 years. He took his duties seriously, perhaps more than most. His colleagues sometimes joked that he saw threats everywhere. But James believed that vigilance was the price of safety. That morning, something felt different to him. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but years of training had taught him to trust his instincts. As he inspected the carriage for the third time, he noticed the driver, an experienced man named Thomas, checking the harnesses with unusual care. "Everything all right, Thomas?" James asked, approaching the older man. Thomas looked up, his weathered face showing concern. "Just being thorough, officer. These old carriages are magnificent, but they require constant attention. The leather straps, the metal fittings, everything needs to be just right." James nodded, appreciating the man's dedication. "I noticed you've been at it for a while." "It's better safe than sorry," Thomas replied, running his hand along one of the harnesses. "Especially with precious cargo." A phrase stuck with James. Precious cargo indeed. He walked around the carriage again, this time looking at everything with fresh eyes. The wheels seemed solid, the chassis secure. The horses appeared calm and well-trained. Still, that nagging feeling persisted. Inside the palace, Kate finished her preparations. She picked up her clutch and took one last look in the mirror. Her hat, a tasteful creation by her favorite milliner, sat perfectly atop her carefully styled hair. She wore minimal jewelry, just her wedding rings and a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Princess Diana. As she descended the grand staircase, palace staff lined up to see her off. She greeted each one warmly, remembering names and asking about family members. This personal touch was one of the things that made her beloved by both staff and public alike. "The carriage awaits." "Your Royal Highness," announced Charles. The head butler Kate stepped out into the courtyard, immediately feeling the cool morning breeze on her face. The wind had indeed picked up just as the forecast predicted. She made a mental note to hold onto her hat once they were moving. James stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. I'll be accompanying you in the escort vehicle today?" "Good morning, Officer Mitchell," Kate replied with a genuine smile. She had seen James many times during various engagements and appreciated his professional demeanor. "Thank you for taking such good care of us." Thomas helped her into the carriage, ensuring she was comfortably seated before closing the door. The interior smelled of old leather and wood polish, a scent that Kate found oddly comforting. It connected her to countless royal figures who had sat in similar carriages throughout history. As final checks were completed, a small crowd began gathering outside the palace gates. Word had spread about the carriage ride, and people wanted to catch a glimpse of their princess. Kate could see them through the carriage window, waving flags and holding phones high to capture photos. James took his position in the escort vehicle that would follow the carriage. His partner for the day, Officer Sarah Chen, sat in the driver's seat. Sarah was relatively new to the Royal Protection Command, but had already proven herself to be sharp and capable. "Ready?" Sarah asked, starting the engine. "Always," James replied, though his eyes never stopped moving, taking in every detail of their surroundings. Thomas climbed onto the driver's seat of the carriage. Gathering the reins in his experienced hands, he clicked his tongue softly, and the horses began to move forward. The carriage wheels turned slowly at first, then found their rhythm on the cobblestones. As they passed through the palace gates, the crowd erupted in cheers. Kate waved gracefully, her smile radiant. Children bounced excitedly on their parents' shoulders, and elderly spectators wiped tears from their eyes at the magnificent sight. The procession moved at a measured pace through the streets, exactly as planned. Police had cleared the route earlier, ensuring a safe journey. Everything seemed perfect, like a scene from a fairy tale. The sun shone brightly, the horses moved with grace, and the princess looked every bit the royal figure the public adored. But James, watching from the escort vehicle, couldn't shake that feeling. His hand rested on the door handle, ready to react to anything unusual. He didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, his instincts would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The carriage rolled smoothly through the historic streets of London, its wheels creating a rhythmic clatter against the pavement. Kate sat inside, occasionally waving to the growing crowds that lined the route. The turnout was larger than expected, with people of all ages pressing forward to catch a glimpse of the procession. Thomas, the carriage driver, maintained perfect control of the horses. His hands held the reins with the confidence that came from 4 decades of experience. He had driven royal carriages since his 20s, starting as an assistant and working his way up to head coachman. During his career, he had transported queens, princes, and countless dignitaries without incident. The route took them past some of London's most iconic landmarks. They passed the Victoria Memorial, its white marble gleaming in the sunlight. Tourists stopped their sightseeing to watch the unexpected spectacle, cameras clicking frantically. A street musician, who had been playing violin near the monument, paused his performance and bowed deeply as the carriage passed. Inside the escort vehicle, James kept his eyes fixed on the carriage ahead. Sarah drove with steady precision, maintaining the perfect distance. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from other security personnel positioned along the route. "All clear at checkpoint 3, a voice reported. "Acknowledged," Sarah responded. James barely heard the exchange. His attention was locked on the carriage, specifically on how it moved. Something about the way it swayed seemed slightly off, though he couldn't identify exactly what bothered him. The horses appeared calm, Thomas looked confident, and the crowds remained orderly. Yet that persistent unease continued to gnaw at him. "You're quiet today," Sarah observed, glancing briefly at her partner. "Just focused," James replied. Leaning forward slightly in his seat, they turned onto Birdcage Walk, the tree-lined avenue that would take them closer to Westminster Abbey. The wind had grown stronger, causing the trees to sway and sending leaves skittering across the road. Kate held her hat with one hand while waving with the other, laughing as a gust threatened to carry it away. The crowds here were denser, held back by temporary barriers and a line of police officers. Schoolchildren waved homemade signs with messages of support for the charity. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, wore a plastic tiara and a dress that mimicked Kate's style. When the princess noticed her, she blew a kiss in the child's direction, causing the girl to squeal with delight. Thomas felt the wind pushing against the carriage. It was stronger than he had anticipated, and the forecast hadn't predicted gusts this powerful. The horses felt it too, their ears flicking backward nervously. He adjusted his grip on the reins, speaking soothingly to the animals. "Easy there, Wellington. It's steady, Windsor," he murmured, using the horses' names. They had worked together for years, and usually his voice alone could calm them. James noticed the horses' behavior change. Their steps became slightly less regular, their heads shaking more than before. He sat up straighter, his training kicking into high alert. Every muscle in his body tensed, preparing for action even though he didn't know what action might be needed. "Sarah, watch the horses," he said urgently. "I see it," she confirmed, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. The carriage approached a gentle curve in the road. Thomas began guiding the horses through the turn, a maneuver he had executed thousands of times before. But as they entered the curve, a powerful gust of wind swept down the avenue, caught the carriage's broadside like a sail, pushing it sideways. Thomas immediately felt the shift in weight. The carriage tilted slightly, and he heard a metallic groan from somewhere beneath him. His heart jumped. That sound wasn't normal. He pulled back on the reins, attempting to slow the horses, but they sensed something was wrong and became skittish. Inside the carriage, Kate felt the sudden lurch. Her hand shot out to grip the interior handle, her training and royal protocols momentarily forgotten as instinct took over. The world seemed to tilt around her, and she heard the frightening sound of metal straining under stress. James saw it all unfold in what felt like slow motion. The carriage's left rear wheel hit an uneven patch of pavement at the exact moment another gust of wind struck. The combination of forces created a perfect storm of physics. The wheel assembly, which Thomas had worried about that morning, finally gave way to the stress. The metal bracket connecting the wheel to the axle snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The wheel broke free, rolling away down the street as screams erupted from the crowd. The carriage dropped on its left side, grinding against the pavement with a horrible scraping sound. Sparks flew from the metal dragging against the road. Wellington and Windsor panicked. Sudden loss of balanced weight behind them, combined with the terrifying noise, triggered their flight instinct. They reared up, their eyes wide with fear, threatening to bolt forward despite Thomas's desperate attempts to control them. Kate was thrown against the left side of the carriage as it tilted at a dangerous angle. She could hear the chaos outside, the screaming crowd, the frightened horses, the shouting of security personnel. The carriage slid several feet, still attached to the panicking horses, heading directly toward the crowd barriers. James didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. Before Sarah could fully brake the escort vehicle, he had already thrown open his door. His years of training condensed into pure action. He hit the ground running, his legs pumping as fast as they could carry him. "Stop those horses," he shouted to anyone who could hear him. Thomas was pulling back on the reins with all his strength, his face red with effort. The elderly coachman knew that if the horses bolted forward, they would drag the damaged carriage directly into the crowd. Children stood just beyond those barriers, their innocent faces now frozen in fear. James ran faster than he had ever run in his life. He wasn't thinking about proper procedure or waiting for backup, wasn't calculating risks or considering consequences. All he could see was the princess trapped in that damaged carriage and the terrified crowd just meters away. His mind focused on one singular purpose: stop this disaster before it became a tragedy. Other security personnel were rushing forward now, but James had a head start and the advantage of youth. He closed the distance to the horses, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his heart pounding against his ribs. The carriage continued its grinding slide forward, the sound of metal on pavement drowning out everything else. Kate, still gripping the handle inside the tilted carriage, tried to push herself upright. She could see the crowd through the window, their faces a blur of shock and fear. She knew she needed to stay calm, that panicking would help no one. But her pulse raced as she felt the carriage continuing to move forward in an uncontrolled manner. James reached the horses just as they prepared to make a full bolt forward. Time seemed to stretch as James reached for Wellington's bridle. The white horse's eyes rolled with terror, foam forming at the corners of his mouth. James knew he had one chance to get this right. If he grabbed wrong or hesitated, the horse might kick him or simply pull away, and then nothing would stop the runaway carriage. His hand closed around the leather bridle with iron determination. The momentum of the horse nearly yanked his arm from its socket, but James held on. His feet scrambled for purchase on the pavement as the horse tried to drag him forward. He could feel the raw power of the animal, over 1,000 pounds of muscle and fear. "Whoa," James commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. He had grown up around horses on his grandfather's farm and knew that confidence and calmness were crucial. "Easy now, easy." Thomas, still pulling on the reins, felt the change immediately. With James anchoring Wellington, the old coachman could focus his efforts on Windsor. Together, they created a coordinated effort to calm the terrified animals. Behind them, Sarah had positioned the escort vehicle to block any backward movement, while other officers rushed forward to help. 2 more security personnel grabbed Windsor's bridle, adding their strength to the effort. Slowly, painfully, the horses began to respond to the combined control. Inside the damaged carriage, Kate remained as composed as possible given the circumstances. She could feel the vehicle had stopped its forward slide, though it still rested at an alarming angle. Her hat had fallen off during the initial jolt. Her carefully styled hair had come loose. But these concerns seemed trivial now. She heard voices outside, officers coordinating their efforts. The sound of the horse's frightened whinnies was gradually being replaced by calmer breathing. Whatever was happening out there, someone had taken control of the situation. "Your Royal Highness, are you injured?" A voice called from outside. It was Sarah, who had run to the carriage door once the vehicle was secured. "I'm all right," Kate called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Just a bit shaken, the crowd had fallen into an eerie silence after the initial screams. Hundreds of people stood frozen, watching the drama unfold. Parents pulled their children back from the barriers, while others held their phones high, recording everything. The footage would later be viewed millions of times across the world. James refused to release Wellington's bridle until he was absolutely certain the horse had calmed. He stroked the animal's neck, speaking in low, soothing tones. The horse's trembling gradually subsided, though its eyes still showed white around the edges. "Good boy," James murmured. "It's over now. You're safe." Thomas climbed down from the driver's seat, his legs unsteady. The reality of what had almost happened was starting to hit him. For decades without incident, and today a wheel assembly had failed, he felt sick thinking about what could have occurred if that young officer hadn't acted so quickly. "Thank you," Thomas said to James, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved her life. You saved all of them." James didn't respond. His focus remained on ensuring the situation was fully under control. Additional Royal Protection officers had arrived, forming a protective circle around the damaged carriage. Medical personnel pushed through the crowd, ready to assist. Sarah carefully opened the carriage door, which now hung at an awkward angle due to the tilt. She extended her hand to Kate. "Your Royal Highness, we need to get you out carefully. The carriage is stable, but we don't want to risk any further movement." Kate took Sarah's hand and began to extract herself from the damaged vehicle. It was an undignified process, quite unlike the graceful entrance she had made that morning. Her dress caught on something inside, and she had to pause to free it. When she finally emerged, her hair disheveled and her dress dusty, she looked more human than royal. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Despite the shock of what they had witnessed, the people were relieved to see their princess emerge safely. Some were crying, overcome with emotion at how close they had come to tragedy. Kate stood for a moment, steadying herself with Sarah's support. She looked at the damaged carriage, the broken wheel lying several meters away, the scrape marks on the pavement. The full weight of what had almost happened began to sink in. Then she saw James, still standing with Wellington, his hand on the horse's neck. Their eyes met across the chaotic scene. Even from a distance, she could see he was breathing hard from his exertion. His uniform slightly disheveled from the struggle with the horse, Kate walked toward him. Ignoring the protests from other security personnel who wanted to rush her away to safety, she needed to thank this man who had acted without hesitation when disaster struck. As she approached, James finally released Wellington's bridle to another handler and turned to face her. He straightened his posture and began to bow, but Kate stopped him with a gentle gesture. "Officer Mitchell," she said, and her voice carried clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the area. "What you did just now was extraordinary. James felt his face flush. "I was just doing my job, Your Royal Highness." "No," Kate said firmly. "You did far more than your job. You put yourself in danger without a second thought." She glanced at the horses, then back at him. "You could have been badly hurt." "The thought never crossed my mind, ma'am," James replied honestly. "I just knew I had to stop them." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of senior security officials and palace staff. They surrounded Kate, checking on her welfare and beginning to make arrangements for alternative transportation. The charity event would obviously be delayed, and decisions needed to be made quickly. But before allowing herself to be whisked away, Kate turned back to James one more time. "I won't forget this," she said quietly. "Thank you." James nodded, unable to find words. As Kate was escorted to a waiting vehicle, he became aware of the cameras pointed at him, the phones recording, the press photographers who had arrived on scene. His private act of duty was now very public. The area buzzed with activity as officials examined the broken carriage, interviewed Thomas about the mechanical failure, and worked to disperse the crowd safely. The broken wheel was retrieved for investigation. Questions would need to be answered about how such a failure could occur with a vehicle used for royal transport. Sarah approached James, slight smile on her face despite the serious situation. "That was quite something, partner. Someone had to do it," James replied, still watching as Kate's vehicle drove away toward safety. "Yes, but you were the one who did it," Sarah pointed out. "Without thinking, without hesitating. That's the difference between a good officer and a great one." James didn't feel great. He felt shaky now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His arm ached where the horse had nearly pulled it from its socket. His hands trembled slightly as the reality of what could have happened played through his mind. The investigation into the carriage incident began within hours. Royal transportation officials arrived at the scene with equipment to examine every detail of the broken wheel assembly. The damaged carriage was carefully loaded onto a transport vehicle and taken to a secure facility where specialists could analyze the failure. James and Sarah were asked to remain at the scene to give their statements. Several officials wanted to hear James's account of the events, and he found himself repeating the story multiple times to different people. Each time he told it, the incident felt more surreal, as if it had happened to someone else. "I saw the wheel break loose," he explained to a senior investigator. "The carriage dropped, the horses panicked, and it was clear they were about to bolt toward the crowd. I ran to stop them." "Did you receive any training specifically for this scenario?" the investigator asked, taking notes. James shook his head. "Not specifically. But I grew up around horses, and my training emphasized rapid response to evolving threats. I just acted on instinct." The investigator nodded approvingly. "Well, your instincts were excellent." Meanwhile, back at Kensington Palace, Kate had been checked by medical staff and declared physically unharmed. A few bruises would likely appear over the next day or two, but she had escaped serious injury. Emotionally, however, she found herself more affected than she had initially realized. She sat in her private sitting room, changed into comfortable clothes, with a cup of tea growing cold on the table beside her. Her assistant, Mary, had tried to engage her in conversation about rescheduling the charity event. But Kate's mind kept returning to those terrifying moments inside the tilting carriage. She remembered the sound of the wheel breaking, a sickening lurch as the carriage dropped, the screams from the crowd. But most vividly, she remembered seeing Officer Mitchell running toward the panicked horses without hesitation. While others had frozen or called for help, he had simply acted. "Mary," Kate said suddenly, interrupting a discussion about tomorrow's schedule, "I need you to find out everything you can about Officer James Mitchell. His full service record, commendations, personal background, everything." Mary looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. May I ask why?" "Because that man saved my life today," Kate replied simply, "and possibly saved many others in that crowd. I want to know who he is." The news of the incident spread rapidly across media outlets worldwide. Within an hour, footage from dozens of phones had been uploaded to social media. The videos showed different angles of the dramatic moment: the wheel breaking free, the carriage tilting, the horses rearing, and James's sprint to grab the bridle. The footage was replayed endlessly on television news programs. Experts analyzed the incident, discussing the physics of what went wrong and marveling at James's quick response. The headline on most news sites read similarly, "Royal Guard saves Princess Kate in dramatic carriage mishap." James's phone began ringing constantly. Friends and family who had seen the news called to check on him and express their pride. His elderly grandfather, the one who had taught him about horses as a child, called from his farm in Yorkshire. "I saw what you did, lad," his grandfather said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother would have been so proud. That's exactly what I taught you, isn't it? Stay calm around horses, move with confidence, never show fear." "I didn't really think about it, Granddad," James admitted. "It just happened." "That's when training matters most," his grandfather replied. "When you don't have time to think, your training takes over." "You did well, James. Very well indeed." After ending the call, James sat in the break room at the security headquarters, nursing a coffee and trying to process the day's events. Other officers came by to congratulate him, some clapping him on the back, others simply nodding their respect. He appreciated the support, but found the attention uncomfortable. Sarah found him there an hour later. "There you are. The commander wants to see you." James stood, straightening his uniform. "Do you know what it's about? What do you think?" Sarah smiled. "You're probably getting a commendation. Maybe more." Commander Robert Hayes was a stern man with 30 years of service. His office was decorated with photographs of various royal events and commendations from his own distinguished career. When James entered, the commander gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Mitchell," Hayes said. "You've had quite a day." "Yes, sir." Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying the young officer. "I've been reviewing the footage and reading the statements. What you did today was remarkable. Reckless, perhaps, but remarkable." James wasn't sure if he was being praised or reprimanded. "I did what needed to be done, sir." "Indeed you did," Hayes agreed. "And that's exactly the quality we need in the Royal Protection Command. The ability to assess a threat and respond immediately, even at personal risk." He paused. "However, I need to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. Did you see the wheel about to fail? Did you have any advance warning?" James thought carefully before answering. "I had a feeling something was wrong, sir. I couldn't identify what, but I felt uneasy all morning. When I saw the horse's behavior change, I moved to a heightened state of alert. But I didn't see the wheel failure before it happened." Hayes nodded slowly. "Your instincts served you well. It's the mark of an excellent protection officer. Some call it intuition. But it's really just your subconscious mind processing hundreds of tiny details that your conscious mind hasn't caught up with yet." "I suppose so, sir. The palace has been in touch," Hayes continued. "Princess Kate specifically requested that you be recognized for your actions. There will be a formal ceremony in a few weeks. But more importantly, she wants to thank you personally." James felt his stomach tighten with nerves. "That's not necessary, sir. I was just doing my job." "Whether necessary or not, it's happening," Hayes said firmly. "You'll be summoned to the palace tomorrow afternoon, and Mitchell, try to accept the gratitude graciously. What you did mattered. Don't diminish that." That evening, James returned to his small apartment in South London. He lived alone, having broken up with his girlfriend 6 months earlier due to the demanding nature of his work. The apartment was neat but Spartan, decorated with just a few personal items: his grandfather's old pocket watch, some family photos, books on security protocols, and equestrian care. He made himself a simple dinner and tried to watch television, but every channel seemed to be showing footage of the incident. He saw himself from angles he hadn't known existed, captured by cameras and phones. The image of him grabbing Wellington's bridle, his face set with determination, had already become iconic. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "So proud of you, darling. Call when you can. Love, ma'am." James smiled and sent back a brief reply. He would call her tomorrow when he had more energy. Tonight, he just wanted quiet, a chance to let his mind process everything that had happened. He thought about Princess Kate, how calm she had been when she emerged from the damaged carriage, despite what she must have been feeling. He thought about Thomas, the elderly coachman who had spent 4 decades without incident, only to face this nightmare scenario. He thought about the crowd, especially the children who had come excited to see their princess, and instead witnessed something terrifying. Most of all, thought about those few seconds when his hands closed around Wellington's bridle. In that moment, everything else had fallen away. There was no crowd, no cameras, no protocols, just a simple equation: stop the horses or people get hurt. The following afternoon, James drove through the gates of Kensington Palace with his stomach churning with anxiety. He had been to the palace many times in his professional capacity, but this was different. This was personal. He wore his dress uniform, freshly pressed, with every button and badge perfectly positioned. A palace aide met him at the entrance and led him through corridors he had never seen before. These were the private quarters, far from the public areas where official engagements took place. The walls were decorated with family photos and children's artwork, alongside priceless paintings and historical artifacts. "Princess Kate is waiting in the garden room," the aide explained. "She wanted somewhere informal for this meeting." They entered a bright, airy room with large windows overlooking a private garden. Kate stood near the window, dressed casually in trousers and a sweater. When she turned to greet him, James was struck by how different she looked from the formal image the public usually saw. She appeared younger, more relaxed, though he could see faint shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well. "Officer Mitchell," she said warmly. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." James sat carefully on the edge of a comfortable armchair while Kate took a seat across from him. The aide discreetly left the room, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to speak with you privately," Kate began, away from all the official ceremony and formality. "What happened yesterday was terrifying, and I needed you to understand how grateful I am for what you did." "Your Royal Highness." "I was simply doing my duty," James replied, falling back on the formal response he had practiced. Kate smiled gently. "Yes, you've said that to everyone who's asked. But I saw your face yesterday, Officer Mitchell. That wasn't duty. That was courage and quick thinking in a moment of crisis. Please don't minimize it, especially not with me." James felt his carefully prepared responses crumble. There was something about her direct honesty that made formal deflections seem inappropriate. "It all happened very fast," he said truthfully. "I didn't really think. I just saw what needed to happen and did it." "That's what makes it remarkable," Kate said. "Most people would freeze or hesitate or wait for someone else to act. You didn't. You ran toward danger while everyone else ran away from it." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what could have happened if you hadn't been there. Those horses were heading straight for the crowd. There were children standing right there, Officer Mitchell. Small children." James nodded. He had thought about this too, though he tried not to dwell on it. But it didn't happen. "Everyone was safe, because of you," Kate insisted. "And I need you to accept that. Not for your ego, but because you deserve recognition for what you did. Too often, acts of genuine heroism go unnoticed while lesser things are celebrated." They talked for nearly an hour. Kate asked about his background, his training, how he came to work in royal protection. James found himself telling her about his grandfather's farm, about learning to handle horses as a boy, about joining the police service fresh from school and working his way up to his current position. "Did you always want this kind of work?" Kate asked. "Honestly? No," James admitted. "I thought I might become a veterinarian. I loved working with animals. But then I realized I wanted to help people directly, to make a difference in moments that mattered. Police work offered that." "And you certainly made a difference yesterday," Kate said. She stood and walked to a desk, returning with a small box. "This is something I wanted to give you personally before any formal ceremony." Inside the box was a pair of antique cufflinks, beautiful silver pieces engraved with the royal cipher. "These belong to Prince Philip," Kate explained. "After he passed, the Queen distributed many of his personal items to family members. I received these, and I've been waiting for the right moment to pass them on to someone who embodies the kind of service and dedication Prince Philip valued." James felt overwhelmed. "Your Royal Highness, I couldn't possibly accept these. They're too valuable, too personal." "Right," Kate said simply. "It would mean a great deal to me. Prince Philip devoted his life to service and duty. He would have approved of what you did yesterday." James carefully took the box, knowing that refusing again would be insulting. "Thank you. I'll treasure them." After their meeting, James was escorted back through the palace, his mind spinning with the unexpected intimacy of the conversation. Kate had been warm, genuine, and surprisingly easy to talk to. The formal princess from the newspapers had shown him a different side. A real person who had been genuinely frightened and was genuinely grateful. The formal recognition ceremony took place 3 weeks later at Buckingham Palace. James received the Royal Victorian Medal, presented by Prince William himself. The ceremony was attended by fellow officers, James's family, and representatives from various security services. Officer Mitchell demonstrated the highest standards of courage and dedication, Prince William said during the ceremony. His actions prevented what could have been a tragedy, and he did so without regard for his own safety. This is the epitome of service. James's grandfather attended the ceremony, traveling down from Yorkshire despite his age. Watching his grandson receive the medal, the old man wiped tears from his eyes. His wife would have been so proud. The investigation into the carriage incident concluded with findings that pointed to metal fatigue in the wheel assembly. The bracket that had failed was over a century old and had developed microscopic cracks that weren't visible during regular inspections. New protocols were immediately implemented for examining historical vehicles used in royal transport, including more frequent and thorough inspections using modern technology. Thomas, the coachman, was cleared of any wrongdoing. In fact, his careful attention that morning, the extra inspections that James had noticed, had been appropriate concern rather than unnecessary worry. He returned to work, but requested a transfer to working only with modern vehicles, finding he no longer trusted the antique carriages. Wellington and Windsor. The 2 horses were retired from royal carriage duty. They were relocated to a royal estate in the countryside where they could live out their days in peaceful pastures. Away from the stress of public duties, the charity event that had been interrupted by the incident was rescheduled for 2 months later. This time, Kate traveled by car, though she made a point of visiting Wellington and Windsor at their new home before the event. She brought them apples and spent time stroking their necks. Thanking them silently for getting through the ordeal, James continued his work in the Royal Protection Command. Though his life had changed in subtle ways. He was recognized everywhere now, his face familiar from the viral footage. People stopped him on the street to shake his hand or ask for photos. He found this attention uncomfortable, but tried to be gracious about it. His relationship with Kate evolved from formal protection officer and royal family member to something more complex. While maintaining all proper protocols in public, there was an understanding between them. She knew she could trust him completely, and he felt a personal commitment to her safety that went beyond professional duty. 6 months after the incident, James received an unexpected letter delivered to his apartment. It was handwritten on personal stationery with the royal cipher embossed at the top. The letter was from Kate, and it was remarkably personal. The letter Kate had written was brief but meaningful. She thanked James again for his actions and mentioned that the incident had changed her perspective on many things. She wrote about appreciating each day more fully and not taking safety for granted. She ended by saying she hoped his life had returned to normal and that the attention from the media had finally died down. James read the letter several times, touched that she had taken the time to write personally. He carefully filed it away with the few keepsakes he treasured most, including his grandfather's pocket watch and the cufflinks that Kate had given him. Life did eventually return to a version of normal. The news cycle moved on to other stories. And while James remained something of a minor celebrity within security circles, the public attention faded. He was grateful for this. He had never sought recognition and felt it's uncomfortable being treated like a hero. His grandfather's health began declining that winter. James visited the farm in Yorkshire whenever his schedule allowed, spending time with the old man who had taught him so much. They would sit in the farmhouse kitchen, drinking tea, and talking about horses, family, and life. "You know what I'm proudest of?" his grandfather said during one visit. "Not that you stopped those horses, though that was magnificent. I'm proud that you knew you could do it. You trusted your skills and your judgment when it mattered most." "You taught me those skills," James reminded him. "Well, I taught you about horses," his grandfather corrected. You develop the character yourself. That's all you, lad. When his grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, James took a week of leave to handle the arrangements and mourn. He inherited the farm, though he wasn't sure what to do with it. The property had been in his family for 4 generations, but required constant work that his career didn't allow time for. He decided to lease the land to a neighboring farmer, but kept the farmhouse and a few acres for himself. On his days off, he began visiting more frequently, finding peace in the quiet countryside that contrasted sharply with his high-stress work in London. One spring morning, James was at the farm repairing a fence when his phone rang. It was Commander Hayes. "Mitchell, I have an unusual request," Hayes began. "Princess Kate is planning a private visit to a children's hospital next month. It's not a formal engagement, quite low-key. She's specifically requested that you be part of her security detail."
Oh.
James paused, hammer in hand. "Did she say why?" "She said she feels safest with you on her team," Hayes replied. "After what happened, I can't say I blame her. Are you available?" "Of course, sir." The hospital visit was indeed low-key compared to formal royal engagements. Kate spent hours with sick children, reading stories, playing games, bringing smiles to young faces dealing with serious illnesses. James watched from his position near the doorways, maintaining security while trying to stay unobtrusive. At one point, a little girl around 7 years old approached him. She was bald from chemotherapy treatments, wearing a hospital gown decorated with colorful butterflies. "Are you the man who saved the princess?" she asked directly. James knelt down to her level. "I helped keep her safe. Yes." "My mummy says you're a hero," the girl continued. She showed me the video on her phone. "Your mummy is very kind," James said. "But you know what? I think you're the real hero. Fighting your illness takes much more courage than what I did." The girl's face brightened. "Really?" "Really," James confirmed. "You're very brave." Kate had watched this exchange from across the room. Later, as they walked to the vehicles, she commented on it. "You were wonderful with Emma," she said. "That little girl has been through so much." "She's remarkably strong," James replied. "These kids all are." "It puts things in perspective, doesn't it?" Kate said thoughtfully. "What happened with the carriage seemed so dramatic and frightening. But these children face battles every single day that make our experience seem small by comparison." Over the following year, James found himself assigned to Kate's security detail more frequently. It wasn't always at her request. He was simply recognized as one of the best in his field. And high-profile assignments naturally came his way, but there was an ease in working with her that made the job less stressful than it might have been. They developed a professional rapport, built on mutual respect and that shared experience of the carriage incident. Kate knew she could rely on him completely, and James felt a personal investment in ensuring her safety that elevated his already high standards. His career flourished. He received promotions and was eventually selected for advanced training in counterterrorism and threat assessment. The carriage incident had proven his ability to perform under pressure, and his superiors trusted him with increasingly important responsibilities. But success in his career came with sacrifices in his personal life. Relationships remained difficult with his demanding schedule and the secrecy required by his work. He dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. His apartment remained sparsely decorated, a temporary place between the farm in Yorkshire and Steads in London. On the 2-year anniversary of the carriage incident, a small private ceremony was held at Kensington Palace. It wasn't publicized, just a quiet gathering of those directly involved. Kate, James, Thomas the coachman, Sarah, and a few senior security officials met in the same garden room where Kate and James had first talked after the incident. "I wanted to mark this day," Kate explained to the small group, "not with publicity or fanfare, but with gratitude among friends. 2 years ago, we experienced something frightening that could have ended in tragedy. Instead, because of quick thinking and courage, everyone stayed safe." She raised a glass of champagne. "To Officer Mitchell, whose actions we honor. To Thomas, whose skill and experience prevented worse. To Officer Chen and all who responded. And to the reminder that in moments of crisis, ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things." They toasted, and conversation flowed easily. Thomas had fully recovered from the trauma of that day and had returned to work with modern vehicles as planned. Sarah had been promoted and now led her own security team. Everyone had moved forward, carrying the experience with them but not being defined by it. As the gathering concluded, Kate asked James to walk with her in the garden. The spring flowers were in bloom, filling the air with subtle fragrances. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Kate spoke. "I never properly thanked you for changing how I view my own security," she said. "Before the incident, I sometimes found all the precautions excessive. Now I understand that every protocol exists for a reason, and that the people protecting me are willing to put themselves in danger to keep me safe." "That's our job," James said simply. "But I understand what you mean. It's different when it's theoretical versus when it becomes real." "Exactly," Kate agreed. "And I want you to know that your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. Not just by me, but by the entire family. You represent the very best of what service means." James felt his face warm at the praise. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness." "Kate," she said gently. "When it's just us, you can call me Kate." It was a small gesture, but it symbolized the shift in their relationship over the past 2 years, from princess and protection officer to something more nuanced. Built on shared experience and mutual respect, as James drove home that evening, he reflected on how one moment had changed the trajectory of his life. That split-second decision to run toward danger instead of following standard protocol had earned him recognition, advancement, and a connection to the royal family he never could have imagined. But more than external recognition, the incident had changed something internal. He had discovered depths of courage and capability he hadn't known he possessed. He had learned that trust in his training, instincts could make the difference between tragedy and triumph. The farm in Yorkshire remained his retreat, a place where he could be simply James Mitchell, grandson of a horse farmer. Rather than the hero officer from the news stories, he spent more time there now, finding that the quiet work of maintaining the property grounded him in ways his professional life, COULDN, single quotes, T dot. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand in the farmhouse that had belonged to his grandfather and think about the chain of events that led from a boy learning about horses to a man stopping a royal carriage disaster. His grandfather had been right. The skills mattered. Character mattered more. James never spoke publicly about the incident beyond the official statements required of him. He deflected interview requests and avoided the spotlight whenever possible. For him, the most important thing wasn't the recognition or the medal. It was knowing that when the moment arrived, when everything depended on immediate action, he had been ready. He had been ready because of training, because of experience, because of instinct, and because of a fundamental commitment to protecting others. That commitment remained the core of who he was and what he did every single day. The carriage itself was eventually restored and placed in a royal museum, with a small plaque explaining its history, including the incident that had made it famous. Visitors could see the wheel assembly that had failed, now repaired and secured, a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong and how important quick thinking could be. Years would pass, and James would continue his career with distinction. He would face other challenging situations, though none quite as dramatic or public as the carriage incident. He would eventually meet someone and build a personal life alongside his professional one. He would retire eventually, returning permanently to the Yorkshire farm. But no matter how much time passed, people would always remember him as the officer who ran toward danger when others hesitated, who grabbed the bridle of a terrified horse and prevented tragedy, who embodied the very best of what service and courage meant. And though he remained humble about it all, deep down, James Mitchell knew that his grandfather would have been proud.